Hey everybody, this is BrettFish Anderson of Out of the Fishbowl, and welcome to what is essentially a bonus podcast that is adding to the ideas of the recent episode, The Amazing Race. And so if you haven't yet heard that episode, my encouragement is to pause this one, go and find The Amazing Race, listen to that, and this builds on that. I saw this amazing analogy on Facebook by a guy called David Avocado Wolf a couple of years ago. And it's called the plate analogy. And he says this, he says, grab a plate, now throw it on the ground. Done. Did it break? Yes. Now say sorry to it. Sorry. Did it go back to the way it was before? No. Do you understand? And so in the context of South Africa, where we look at apartheid and we look at colonialism as the breaking of the plate, and while I'm going to be speaking specifically into South Africa, I can only imagine that these ideas, most of the ideas that I'm sharing in this podcast, will be relevant to people listening from other countries. So stick around. But if you imagine that colonialism and then apartheid were the breaking of a plate, then 1994, once Nelson Mandela had been released and became the first black president of South Africa, there was the sense that things changed. Now, I've got a friend, Craig Stewart, who has this statement that goes something along the lines of, in 1994, the law of South Africa changed, but the spirit of South Africa stayed the same. And I think what he means by that is that for the majority of white people, in 1994, nothing really shifted. For black people, there were certain laws that were changed. They could go to beaches, they could go to university, they could live in different places, all those kinds of things. But for white people, not a lot changed. Not a lot was different. We didn't give back the money that we'd got on the backs of black people. We didn't give back land that had been put aside specifically for us. We didn't give away the advantages and the privileges and the inheritances of land and money and resources that had been accumulated and stolen from black and colored and Indian people in the country. And so by saying sorry, and not even a lot of white South Africans did that, but that was kind of the extent of what was done. And then white people largely adopted this attitude of, can we move on now? Are we done? Now everyone is free, everyone's happy, the country works for everyone. Cool, let's move on. But not a lot was done in terms of reparation, in terms of reconciliation. And so for black and colored and Indian people, they sat with a largely broken plate. And even the sorry that didn't really exist, the changes to the laws didn't do a whole lot in terms of putting things back together. And so that's what we're going to address in this episode, because once we've had the Amazing Race episode, and once white people hear and start to understand and grasp the idea a little bit about privilege and things like that, then often people will say, but what can I do? I want to make a difference. I want to change. I want to be better. I want to work on my anti-racism. But practically, what can I do? And so I'm going to be sharing some ideas that have worked for me, some things about learning new ways of speaking and being and thinking and learning, and also unlearning, stopping some things, trying to move away from some ideas, changing the way I think about things. And we're going to see this in a two-part bonus podcast episode called 30 Ideas for White People Asking, but what can I do? Okay, so 30 ideas for white people asking, but what can I do? And we're going to start with a really easy one. Number one, start reading some helpful books. This is kind of a low-hanging fruit way, an easy way to get yourself moving on this journey. Because I grew up in apartheid South Africa, I was fed a very biased history in school. And so when I earnestly began my journey of interrogating my own racism and prejudice and the work I needed to be doing in South Africa, there were two books that played the hugest role in terms of helping me learn and understand the story of South Africa. The first was a book called How Can Man Die Better by Benjamin Pogrund, which tells the story of Robert Sobukwe, who was an incredible leader that I feel like South Africa largely lost out on. And his hopes and dreams of an Africa for the Africans, which didn't exclude white people. And so that book really, just a look into the life of Robert Sobukwe, I can't recommend the difference that book did for me. And then the other one that a lot of people talk about is I Write What I Like by Steve Biko. And that's a collection of essays and speeches which give insight into a man that so many people looked up to as a key South African leader back then, and whose words and life still hold so much power and influence today. And so those are two of, I would say, the more significant thought leaders when it comes to South African history. And I'm sure there are a lot of other names. Those were two books that particularly helped me. And then I also found the book White Fragility to be super helpful. This is written by an American woman, Robin DiAngelo, and there's a lot of controversy. I think whenever books or movies or whatever become famous, there's going to be a lot of people that speak out against them. And so there are questions about Robin DiAngelo and some of the stuff connected to the work that she does. But at the same time, I found White Fragility to be really helpful in terms of understanding why white people often react in defensiveness, why we find it hard to really show up well in spaces with Black people. And I would encourage you, whether it's those books or other books, to find some books, especially if you haven't read up on the history of South Africa. Find some books that will help you to really start thinking differently, hearing a different perspective, and building up your knowledge of the history of the country that you live in. So if you are listening to this from another country, then go and find some books written by people that live there, people of color in those spaces that speak to the situations and the lives that they have lived in those spaces and the challenges that they faced. Ta-Nehisi Coates is another American voice that I've learned a lot from as he speaks into his context, and there are very, very many other people. But find some books. That is a really easy one. Just start reading, start educating yourself. It might be listening to podcasts, it might be finding articles, but just start doing the work of educating yourself. Very easy. And number two is really connected to number one, and I've definitely spoken about this one before. Change up the voices you listen to. And my colleague Seth Nyker had this to say: to explore diversity, one must depart from the dominant narratives that monopolize our everyday social realities. It is important to wonder about the possibilities that may arise when one departs from the knowledge platforms or knowledge propelled by dominant narratives to embark on a journey of learning from knowledge that is not part of the dominant narrative. So again, it's talking about the mainstream of where news comes from, the mainstream of where you hear your stories, and even the mainstreams of where we get our entertainment, and encouraging us to change up those voices. And I've spoken about that. One of the biggest lessons I learned in America was to read people who don't look like you. And until that point, typically the people I read would have been white, middle-aged, Christian, American authors. And so even before I came back to South Africa, I was really affected by that challenge. It just made so much sense to get different perspectives, to hear different narratives. And so I started to read a lot of women. I discovered my favorite author, Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, who wrote novels from a Nigerian perspective, but also people like Sisonke Msimang, Austin Channing Brown, Nadia Bolz-Weber, and others. I started reading people of other races. I've mentioned Steve Biko. There was also Stephen Lungu, Michelle Alexander, and more. And even people of other faiths or backgrounds. So Elias Chakur, Naeem Atik. I read a lot of those to try and understand what was happening in Palestine, Israel, and to get some perspective on those stories of a region that's so important. And so I started to be exposed to many different ideas and stories and even ways of thinking by taking up that challenge. And I cannot recommend it enough, because if we only ever read, watch, or listen to people who tend to look and think like us, we will largely end up backing the narratives we already have and confirming what we think we already know or believe. But how refreshing to read someone who thinks differently than you and know that you don't have to absolutely agree with everything or even anything they say, but to be open to the fact that this might usher in a whole new world of learning for you. And so my colleague Seth extends this narrative. He says, start eating from a different menu, reading from a different story, a story of those who are not in power. That is so huge. If we read that thing that history is written by the victors, by those who won the wars. And so start reading stories from those who are not in power. And he gives this example. Find a mentor who is outside your class or your race or your knowledge base, And so in South Africa, if you are a DA supporting white male, find a mentor or at least a friend to learn from the other side of the railway tracks. For example, an EFF supporting black male. And maybe some of those are going to be a bit challenging for us, but it's that idea of getting different voices and different perspectives. And so where you choose to get your news. A site like Al Jazeera will give you a very different set of news from something like CNN or the other extreme Fox News. And so many people have their worldviews shaped by where they get the news rather than what the news is, because the news has been shaped in a certain way. There's a certain story that's trying to be told. There's certain narratives, and we'll get onto that a little bit later in these ideas. But where you choose to get your news, who you choose to follow on social media, that's another one. If you are active on social media, start following black people, start following women if you're a man, start following people from other religions, start following people from other countries and other perspectives, and build up a space where people are giving you a broader understanding of the world and their experience of the world. I've learned so much on social media from people that are different to me. And then what podcasts you listen to, and even what series and movies you watch. And so there was a series, I don't know if it's still there, Dear White People on Netflix. Go and give that a chance. It might be a bit hardcore for some of you, but that really helps deal with some of these issues. The movie Crazy Rich Asians. Just start to take in, and beyond that, you can move to where you choose to shop and where you choose to eat, because that will determine the voices you invite to speak into your life and shape and influence you. And so start changing these up, start broadening your horizons, and be okay to sit with some uncomfortable thoughts and ideas. On a trip to Durban a couple of years ago, I was picked up at the airport by a Muslim ANC councillor, Ashraf Kader, who I'd never met before except on Facebook, and I was going to the airport, I needed a lift. He said, I'll give you a lift. And so we had the opportunity to connect and see a little bit into each other's lives as we chatted openly on the drive. And I've stayed in contact with him. I've got to visit him a few more times when I've been in Durban. Somebody with a very different mindset, and yet we've been able to learn and be encouraged by each other. There is so much wealth on offer, but it starts with an intentionality of choices made. And then the third one, and this is such an important one to me, make every effort to call people by their name or by the name they choose to be called. And part of my wedding speech recently was inviting or challenging the crowd of people who were our people. You are our community of people. You were maybe Brett's community, you were Amanda's community, but now together you are the people we want to walk with and do life with. And so I challenge people who often get Amanda's name wrong. And so if you see it and you're English, you see Amanda, I started calling her Amanda. And then one day she told me, no, it's Amanda. It's an Afrikaans name, but it's a different name. And that was something that really struck me. Amanda. And it doesn't seem to bother her, but it really bothers me when people who have known her for a long time, and even people after that challenge, have not made the effort. It's so easy to change from going Amanda to Amanda. And if you've called her Amanda your whole life and now you realize, then it takes a bit of work and effort. But a name is such a powerful thing, and is linked to identity and self-value and dignity and so much more. And especially in other cultures, in black cultures, Indian colored cultures, the name often carries deep meaning with it that we don't often have in white culture. Many times in white culture, people just like the name, or they called you the name of somebody that they liked in the movie or whatever it was. And there are many spaces across South Africa, and in particular homes where cleaning or childcare or gardening are done, as well as garages, I see it a lot there, and restaurants, where people have been given, inverted commas, easier to pronounce names, typically to make it easier for white people to say them. And the way that I approach this, because it can be an awkward, uncomfortable thing, you're not wanting to make someone else uncomfortable. But if a guy at the petrol station comes to my car window and I see that his name badge says Eric, then I will ask, do you have another name? And often they will answer. A lot of the people at petrol station tend to be Malawian for some reason. And they will often tell me their name, and I'll go, what would you like people to call you? And sometimes the answer is Eric, but most times it is not. And it's a thing of respect, and it's a thing that starts to build trust and relationship when you can look at someone and say, I see you, I know you, and I want to call you by the name that you want to be called by. And by doing that, I'm interrupting the narrative. Even more in moment that says your name is too hard for me to get right, which speaks of you are not important enough for me to put a little effort into. And if the name is difficult for you to pronounce, which may largely be because you're not used to the combination of letters or sounds, then practice it until you get it right. If you can handle words like entrepreneurial and gratuitous, then Fazile, Babalwa, and Tobeko should be a cinch. And something like Sinokolo might take a little more effort, but back yourself to get it right with some practice. This does sometimes require a little bit of work. It definitely requires intentionality, but it is one of the easiest things to do and can be a great platform for building stronger relationships with people that you regularly interact with. Start with the people who work in your home and office and maybe people you see in the supermarket with name tags, and let this become a habit of curiosity and intention. And also, the more familiar you become with African names, the easier the new ones will be to get right more quickly. A name is a terrible thing to waste. And let me just give a sidebar, a little PS here. You may find that after numerous attempts, you are butchering somebody's name so badly that they might actually prefer that you call them an easier one, which is why I generally go to that question of what name would you like me to call you? Because if I'm forcing somebody who has a nickname that they love, and I'm like, no, I'm going to call you Sipo or whatever it is, then that's not respecting them. And so there are times when a person might have a name and it might be the English name that they prefer. But taking a moment to say, hey, what would you like to be called? This is an easy way, but a huge way for us to start this journey of, well, what can I do? Start by getting people's names right. That feels like an easy one. I think we need to understand with all of these things, we're dealing with a troubled, traumatic, painful past, that it's not always going to be easy and it's not always going to be straightforward. Sometimes we're going to get it wrong, and that's okay, as long as we are working towards improving ourselves, working on our anti-racism, and as long as we can own it when we get it wrong. And even with the name thing, it's not always that straightforward, because sometimes there are power dynamics at play, which requires a little more work. I remember years ago, I was staying with some friends in Durban, and there was a woman that they called Pretty who came and cleaned their house and helped them look after their children. And when they had asked her what her name was, she had told them it was Hlengiwe, but told them that they could call her Pretty. And so when they were out one day, I had a conversation with her and asked her what she would like to be called, and she responded with Hlengiwe. And so it seemed like there was maybe some dynamic in her working relationship with them that likely made her feel that she needed to give them an easier name to pronounce. And so they'd done the work and made the effort, but there was an aspect of power that was possibly still affecting the outcome. And so sometimes these things take a little bit more work to get right. And it was amazing. Like, I stay with them often when I go to Durban, and I remember the next visit or a couple of visits later when they referred to her then, and since then, when they refer to her, they call her Hlengiwe. And so they've been able to kind of they had done the work already, and it was complicated or whatever, but they've changed their mindset, and they're really making an effort. And I love that. And I love that when we start to get these things right, or we start to get them a little bit more right in one area, it can really bubble over into other areas. And a quote from Uzo Amaka Aduba, I hope I'm saying her name right, Uzo Amaka Aduba, an actress from the series Orange is the New Black, demonstrates this perfectly. She said this: I asked my mother if I could be called Zoe because no one was pronouncing my name correctly. She said if they can learn to say Tchaikovsky, Michelangelo, and Dostoevsky, they can learn to say Uzo Amaka. And that really isn't. It's often just that thing of, I don't want to. It's too many vowels. It's too complicated. It's just give me something easier to say. And it's like, no, do the work. Learn to say my name correctly. If it matters for Amanda, or at least it matters for me about Amanda, then it should matter for you and the people in and around your life. People can learn to say our names correctly, and we can do the work of getting other people's names right. Moving on to number 4, and this is one that I've dealt before on The Amazing Race, so I'll try not go into it too much. But it's the idea of seeing color, see color, and let that be a really good thing. And so we've heard about this idea of people saying, I'm colorblind, I don't see color. That is unhelpful, because if people are being treated differently because of color in this situation in the country, then it's important that we see that. And I had a lot of my black friends telling me that kind of the meaning behind this point is that if you don't see color, you're saying you don't see me. You don't see the way I've been unfairly treated, unfairly paid. You don't see the way people regard me with suspicion when I walk in a shop and have security chasing me. You don't see color is saying that you don't see how people wind up their windows when I walk by, but they don't do the same when a white person walks by. And so that is kind of the importance of needing to see color, because once we start to see color, then we can start to observe where things aren't so rainbow nationary around us, where these differences still do happen. And some of the stuff is stuff we need to unlearn. So I'm thinking of going into a shop and there's two people behind the counter, and one is black and one is white. And my immediate assumption is that the white guy is the manager, so I'll look to him or defer to him. And the same thing will happen if it's a man and a woman. I might expect the man to be in charge or whatever. And that's something that I find myself from time to time still having to kind of catch myself on, still having to unlearn, which is why I talk about this as a journey of anti-racism that will likely continue for the rest of my life. Some of that stuff is just embedded in us, and it's things we have to unlearn, and sometimes we have to unlearn them a number of times. And so if the life of a black person is significantly different to that of a white person, then it means there's still much work to be done. And if we look at the townships, if we look at the Cape Flats, if we look at what we call geographical apartheid that still lingers, if we look at money, and a lot of the things we're going to look at in these episodes are to do with class, to do with who has more money than other people. But because historically white people had the most money, black people had the least money, the class stuff and the race stuff often overlaps, and we call it intersectionality. That sometimes the things will seem like class things, but because of the race history in our country, they actually are things of race as well. And so we have to see color. We have to be aware of when somebody is being treated unfairly because of their color, and we have to be prepared to step in there. And then the other side of it is the notion of the richness that different people and groups bring to the table. So if we are colorblind, we miss out on the fact that colored people, Indian people, black people, white people all bring their own specific flavors and styles and stories and perspectives and ways of showing up. And that when we can celebrate them all around the table, then it becomes a beautiful thing. Then we start to see this rainbow, and it's something we can actively look towards. But we need to be able to see color to do that. And so seeing color doesn't have to be a negative thing. And in fact, we have to see color both from the negative side of being aware when people are being treated differently, and from the positive side of saying when different colors show up, when different people show up, when different classes of people and genders and religions show up, it is a more beautiful thing. The place becomes more alive and more rich, and it's amazing. Number 5, recognize and acknowledge the dignity of those who do not look like you. And this is a really easy one and could quite possibly have been the first idea we looked at. This is seeing people created in the image of God kind of idea. And so when Amachle is ringing up your groceries at the till in the supermarket, make eye contact, greet her with her name if it's on a name badge, and then ask her if you've said it right if you're not sure, and say thank you. And when Tandalwetu arrives in the morning to clean your house, make eye contact, smile, greet her with her name. And if you don't know the name of the person who cleans your house, shame on you. Go sort that out straight away. And maybe offer her a cup of coffee or tea before she starts work, maybe in your favorite mug. When a person comes up to your window at the traffic lights and asks for money or tries to sell you a newspaper or magazine, make eye contact, greet them, let them know whether you are or aren't going to help them this time. And it's okay if you don't help them. And maybe tell them to have a good day. Just this is all about seeing people, seeing the inherent value in people. And so recognize and acknowledge the dignity of those who do not look like you. And as a disclaimer, apparently there's a semi-smile face that white South Africans have when looking at people of another race, which tends to communicate, I see you, please don't steal my bag, or something like that. Ask your black friends about it. It's a real thing. You may need to practice yourself out of this. So it's not putting on a fake smile. It's about being generally happy to see people around you. And so walking in the streets, just seeing people, noticing people, and trying to treat them the same, and communicating dignity. And as I said, like this will overlap with these ideas of class. And so if you treat your dentist differently from how you treat the woman at the supermarket, then stop it. If you treat a white stranger you pass on the street differently from a colored stranger you pass on the street, stop it. And so some of that stuff could be about class. And so there's a certain way that we treat people that we think have made it or have more money or are above us or whatever. And there's a way we treat people that are kind of on the sidelines or that we may see as less than. And these things overlap. So it's not always about race, but again, given the history of South Africa, race and class often overlook. Recognize and acknowledge the dignity of those who do not look like you. And of course, those who do. I asked my friend Silindile to help me out in terms of culturally whether looking black people in the eye is actually a helpful thing or not. And her response was super helpful. She said this, okay, cool. So some people that are much older, think maybe 50 or 60, will be old school and shy. If they don't make eye contact back, please, I beg, don't be offended. The young Black South Africans are way more open-minded, and if it's a work environment like retail, they've been trained so they will make eye contact, etc. If you are confused, like Brett said, ask. Paint the picture to your Black mates like me, and we will help you. But mostly imagine how life for your kids is and think, I need to do better. I need to be the change so that my son Tom and his mate Sachaba never feel awkward or unsafe in my presence. And I love that last line from Silindile, that we need to work on these changes so that people don't feel awkward or unsafe in my presence, or that they are the person that is making us feel unsafe. And then number 6, work at unlearning your stereotypes. And so when Penny Sparrow made her disgusting public comment about monkeys in 2016, Penny Sparrow got taken to task and she received the hugest backlash. When Adam Katsavelos made his even stronger, disgusting public comment about the absence of certain people on the beach in Europe, Adam Katsavelos got taken to task and received the biggest backlash. Yes, in both cases, there were some other people who were hurt by association, but there was never a sense of either of those incidents being blamed on white people as a whole. And while I was living in America, I witnessed a subtle but terrifying tendency in the media when it came to acts of terrorism and the general difference in reporting on stories about white people and Black people. And you can just look in, we don't really have newspapers anymore, or not in the same way, but online stories. How are stories reported? How do they report it if a Black person does something? How do they report it if a white person does something? And so when a Muslim man committed a crime, it was typically labeled a Muslim terrorist attack. But when a white man committed a crime, he was typically called a lone gunman, even though the statistics show that white men are responsible for more acts of terror in America than brown Muslim men. So when it's a Black person, a brown person, their whole race is brought into it. When it's a white person, oh, it's a lone gunman, this is an exception to the story. And then typically when a white shooter was written about in a newspaper, there would be a picture of his college graduation with the idea that something went wrong in the success story moment to move him to that point. But when a Black person had committed a crime, they looked for the worst possible picture. So maybe there's drink or cigarette in hand, everyday clothes, to share the narrative that this was the expected outcome for someone who is so obviously troubled. And the media has been complicit. And I've seen examples of this, of how different stories are reported. And so start paying attention to that. Stereotypes are influenced by family and friends, by what we watch, read, and listen to, by the attitude of our sports team players, by what's preached on a Sunday, spoken by our favorite DJs and celebs, and what people share on social media and in WhatsApp groups. And so, again, a lot of this stuff is about starting to become more aware of what people are saying, how they're talking about people, how they're treating people. And just as none of us white people would like to be brushstroked in comparison to Penny Sparrow or Adam Katsavelos, so we need to realize that any negative experience we've had with a Black, colored, or Indian person does not reflect all Black, colored, and Indian people, in the same way that our negative experiences with white people have never made us think all white people are whatever. And so we need to work at unlearning the stereotypes we have in our heads, and we need to pay attention to how the media portrays different people and what hidden messages are sometimes being sent. And the best way I've found to undo a stereotype is to get to know people and build deep friendships. And that way, when a stereotype rears its head, it has a name and a face and a story and a family that are important to me. And when I hold the stereotype against the life and experiences of my friend, then it quickly disintegrates and I can easily recognize it for what it is. And so I think one of the later points is going to be about making friends with people who don't look like you. And that can be a tricky one because we don't want to make token friends. But as we start to develop deep friendships, deep relationships, as we start to really see people, as we start to hear their stories, that is the best way to break down stereotypes. And then we won't find ourselves saying, oh, typical, all those people are like that. Oh, that person's just typical or whatever. And we'll start being able to interrupt those things as well. Okay, I realized that I said this was going to be a two-parter, and I'm not going to go back and edit it, but I think at the very least this is going to be a three-parter because I'm just really getting into these ideas, and I hope they're being helpful. And the idea of 30 ideas is that not all 30 ideas will apply to you, but hopefully there's a couple you can go, that's amazing. Or even if you just start with the first 3 and then come back and listen to this and tackle the next 3 and kind of move on from there. So let me bounce through the next kind of two, and then I'll end off with two of the more significant ones, and then we'll end this episode. And in separate episodes, I'll add the next 20 hints and tips on how we can do a little bit better as white people. So number 7, I've got do your homework before hitting share. And that can come from two angles. And this is specifically for people on social media. Often we see something with a shock headline, it's a farm murder, and we send it on. We haven't checked the source. We haven't verified whether it's true or not. We haven't seen who sent it to us. And so negative stories tend to get shared far and wide. And that's often how the stereotypes get built up. And so all I'm saying is do your homework before hitting share, especially when it's a negative story, especially when it's something that's going to increase racial tension, for example. If it's negative, then take time to, and I mean, this is bigger than just race stuff, because people read that a celebrity dies and then everyone gets super excited and share the thing, and then the person hasn't died. And it's hard to go backtrack and kind of undo all the gossip and rumors and stories that have grown since then. So this is a general life principle. But especially when it comes to race stuff, do your homework before hitting share. Go and check sources. Look where an article came from. Look who posted it. See what other kinds of things they posted. What kind of story are they trying to share? And maybe Google and see if there's a couple of other stories verifying the thing before you share. But then the other side of that is that we need to be sharing positive stories in abundance. So there are so many people and organizations and groups and churches and families doing incredibly amazing things in South Africa. I volunteer with Bottom Up and speak about them all the time. And there's the Life Matters organization, and we all know Gift of the Givers. And there are so many different groups, Heartlines that I work with, doing incredible, amazing things. Those are the stories that we need to be sharing in abundance, not because we want to deny that bad things are happening, but the negative stories often get far more airtime when there are an abundance of amazing stories that are happening. We need to brag about our friends that are doing good things. A lot of the time when we tell simple stories of people doing good stuff, it helps other people to go, oh, I could do that. And it inspires and motivates. So it's not about bragging. And I like this idea of bragging about your friends. When your friends are doing amazing things, like just tell the stories so that other people can get the ideas, can often get the motivation, or just get the power to go, oh, this is something I can do. Number 8, learn the basics of the predominant Black African language in your area. This is a tough one for me because I'm 51 years old, because I struggle with languages, and because I've tried a number of times to really get going with isiXhosa. And at least being able to say isiXhosa and not Xhosa is a good start. And I'm not saying become fluent, because I think becoming fluent in the predominant Black language where you are is amazing. I think that's first prize. I think we should all be working towards that. And I have done a course or two about trying to learn isiXhosa and worked at it, and really want to go back there and really hope that it happens one day. But as the very basic, learn how to say hello, what is your name, I only speak a little bit of isiXhosa or whatever the language is, and be able to engage with people. Because at the very least, I was in Malawi for 10 weeks, and I think I've mentioned often when I go to a garage, the person who's serving me is a Malawian. And just by saying Mulibwanji, which is the greeting in Malawi, in Chichewa, like the light that comes on in the person's face. Somebody sees me, somebody knows me, and it's very small and it's very insignificant, but it's a lot bigger and more significant than doing nothing and knowing nothing. So it's a starting point. Learn the basics of the predominant Black African language in your area. In a country which is, I think, 75% Black people, it is a small step that we can take. And if you can, and there's Ubuntu Bridge, there's a lot of different places where you can learn Xhosa, or maybe you can find a friend who's willing to kind of teach you, walk a road with you, and pay them. Pay a Black friend of yours to teach you the language, and that can be a way to make some employment. But let's get started. Let's step towards people. That's what all these steps are. How can I step towards people? Number 9 is interrogate the spaces you are in. And what I mean by that is, if you are in all white spaces, there are people in Cape Town, I think little kids in Cape Town, and you take an area like Bergfleet, and there are kids that can grow up there and believe, without being told a word, without being given a racist word or thought from anybody, they can grow up and absolutely believe that Black people are there to serve them, because there's a Black person who cleans their house, there's a Black person who cleans their garden, the person who rings up their groceries at the store is Black. And so every time they have an encounter with Black people, it's a person that is serving them in some way. And white people are the people that are invited to dinner, that sit at the table, that are in positions of leadership, that are preaching at church, all those kind of things. And so we have to be intentional about interrupting that, because spatial apartheid did such a good job of dividing people. And I'm thinking specifically of Cape Town, where I live. The black people live on the outskirts, the colored people kind of buffer in the middle, white people live close to the city and all along the coast and that sort of thing. And it is changing gradually, but it is still largely segregated. We have to be intentional about the spaces we are in. And so for myself, when I joined a new church, the last church I joined, St. John's, the top of the list reason I joined was I was looking for a space that was diverse, not only in people sitting in the pews, but in people at the front as well, people leading, people on leadership teams, people working at the place. And the new church that I'm in, Wellspring Community Church, there is such a strong diversity in the church that we are at, and that's important to me. And it's a diversity on many levels, so not just race, but race representative of the area we're in, which is Lansdowne, is a key issue. And you can do this by starting to shop at different places, by going to a different gym, by choosing a different coffee shop. Choose places that don't look all white and interrogate the spaces you are in that are all white. Ask questions, challenge the spaces. And I think that this is another way in which we can really change things up, because if you are only in a place with white people, you're not likely to make good black friends. And we've spoken about that a good way to break down stereotypes is having good, deep friendships with people from other races. So where are you meeting those people? It can be the sports team you choose to be on. And a big part of the question is who, and this might be a later one that comes up, who gets invited to sit at your dinner table. Start being intentional about the spaces you inhabit that you do have power and control over. Who are you inviting out for coffee? Who are you going running with? Who are you inviting to go sport with you? And things like that. And then finally, for this part, number 10, spend a lot of time listening. And this is one of the biggest, again, there's a number of these that could be kind of point number one, but really actively listening to friends of color and listening to their shared experiences without correcting them, without interrupting, without trying to fix it, without bringing tears because you moved by it, just actively listening to how people find themselves in the country. Because you might say, oh, race is not a thing and everyone's treated the same and now there's all these laws that make it harder for white people and all that. Listen to your black, colored, and Indian friends. And I think you need to be in a fairly good relationship with somebody before you say, hey, can you tell me how you experience race in this country? Or what is it like as a person of color in this country? But there are many people that will sit and have those conversations with you. And a caveat on that whole thing, and again, this might come up later, is be very careful of not making your friends of color or people of color do the work of anti-racism for you. So don't go to your black friends and say, tell me how not to be racist, which is why I am sharing these tips with you, because I have done some of the work and I've done some of the listening. And as white people, we need to educate each other. We need to do the work with each other, but we do need to be open to where black, colored, and Indian people can speak into our blind spots. And if there are people that are willing to share their stories and experiences, we really need to be leaning in and listening and really trying to understand, what is it like to be a person of color in South Africa? What was it like? We need to hear stories of what it was like in apartheid, and we need to hear stories of what it is like even now, where people are still experiencing those things. And so can you as a white person commit to asking someone about their experience and at the same time commit to listening without challenging, giving excuses, defending, or telling a story about a similar thing that happened to you? Just listen and try to hear the pain and dehumanizing that often exists within the experiences of people who do not look like you in your country. It can be such a powerful experience for someone to receive an I see you, and especially when that person looks a lot like the person or people who were responsible for that particular prejudice and pain. So can we take time to draw close and really listen and just sit in the pain with our fellow South Africans? Let these stories build empathy in us and awareness of the depth of work that still needs to be done. And the only response that we really need to offer at the end is thank you for sharing, or maybe I'm sorry this happened to you. But let the story occupy the stage. Don't push it to the side with any more words that are necessary. To sit in silence with someone who has taken the risk of sharing a heavy burden can be such a gift. And then let the story continue to penetrate your heart and mind and soul. This is difficult work. It's complicated work. It's so important. And as you've listened to these first 10 points, none of these are particularly heavy, None of them are particularly like asking a lot of you. Go and read some books, go hang out in some different spaces, listen to people, learn a few words of a language. These are all very simple, low-hanging fruit things that we can do to work on our anti-racism and to start embracing people of color around us. I hope that you have found this helpful. I hope you'll listen again. I hope you've taken notes, and we'll work through the things systematically. If you'd like a list of any of these, get hold of me. I can send you the list of them. I can send you the list of the 30 I'm going to be dealing with. But let's do the work, because it is beautiful and amazing when people commit to anti-racism. One of the stories at our wedding was a friend of mine, who is also a very good friend of Amanda, Helene, who spoke about when I used to write stuff on Facebook and I used to irritate her and make her angry, and then she considered unfriending me, and for some reason she didn't, and stuck around and worked through the stuff. And over time, she started to realize some of the anti-racism work that needed to happen in her. And it took a long time. And it took some anger, and it took some uncomfortability, and it took some of me irritating her. And we've got to keep doing this, because it is uncomfortable work, but we live in a country that still does not treat everyone the same. And there are people that are really still treated badly. And so it's up to us to build bridges, to extend tables, to offer invitations, to listen, to sit with people, to build deep friendships, and start to create a beautiful country where everyone feels welcome, where everybody feels like their voice is valid, they feel as human as the next person. And so share this with other people that you feel need to hear it. Share it with other people that you think are open to it. Maybe start by sharing the Amazing Race episode, but lean into the stuff. Let's get doing this, and I'll be sharing another 10 tips with you in the next one. This is BrettFish Anderson, out of the fishbowl. Thank you for listening.